Thank you very much for coming and for your interest in early modern Japan and England. Have many of you visited the samurai exhibition at the British Museum? Yes. Will Adams, who arrived in 1600, as Chris mentioned, he received samurai status, and his story is very popular and is for many people an entrance into early modern Japan, because we have the film Shogun with Richard Chamberlain, and so he appears in popular culture quite often. It's really special to have his logbook. And he wanted to return to England, but had to stay because his knowledge of his nautical knowledge, his knowledge of shipbuilding was very precious to the shogun at that time, Ieyasu, and then his son Hidetada. So they, Will Adams stayed. He became fluent in Japanese, of course. And by the time English traders arrived in 1613, he arrived in 1600, 1613 the first English traders arrived, the East India Company. And Will Adams became the mediator between the shogunal authorities and these English traders. And importantly, this is the Shoinshu, the agreement of trade, and also very important, the last point is about extraterritoriality, that Englishmen would only be charged according to their own law and not to Japanese law. So this document is very precious. But today I want to tell a little bit a different story about these early English-Japanese encounters that goes beyond the trade relations, because the usual story says that after 10 years the English trade relations ceased. In 1623 the English had to withdraw from Japan, and for many historians that's the end of the story. The story starts with Will Adams and closes with the withdrawal of the English traders in 1623. However, we have actually, and through books, and this is what me and my colleagues did in a book that we published last year, we reconstruct relations between Japan and early modern Europe, not only through people, but also through books and items that traveled across the globe. And in my own chapter, I look at these items. And one important thing, just as a quick background information, are these early books. The Jesuits arrived in 1549 in Japan, and they started to send letters to Europe. And these letters were translated very quickly into European languages, including Latin, and we have here Latin versions. And that was already in the 16th century. Knowledge about Japan reached, books were printed in Leuven, where lots of exiled scholars lived from Cambridge and Oxford, because there was already kind of hostility against Catholics going on in England, and these people relocated to Leuven. It was a very intellectual center, and these books about Japan were printed there, and they arrived probably in England by scholars who got them there and brought them back to England. So all this migration of scholars in the 16th century, because of the political, religious reasons, is very important, why we also have these very old books from the 16th century about Japan. So there was knowledge about Japan before the traders arrived. Now, the traders also brought knowledge about England to Japan, which was not just trading knowledge, but they brought knowledge about the gunpowder plot. They brought anti-Catholic artwork. We have a colleague, if anyone is interested, who reconstructed all the material that the traders brought, all the knowledge about politics, issues that were going on in England to Japan, telling Adams about it. And he was of course informing shogunal authorities about what he had heard. Because even in Japan there was already a hostility against missionary work. The shogun was not sure if he wants that, but there was not yet a persecution. However, the English traders' appearance and all the information they brought about, Jesuits being expelled from England, that gave the shogun quasi a proper reason to say, okay, they were dangerous citizens in that country, I also don't like them. So in 1614, 1 year later, there was an issue, an edict, and all priests, also high-ranking families, Catholic families, were expelled, Christian families from Japan. And the author of this book here, Pedro Morricone, was one of the people who was expelled. People were sent into exile to Manila, Macau, some went to Thailand. He went to Manila, and from Manila to New Mexico, Nueva España, which is Mexico. And in Mexico, he wrote about that persecution that started. I think many of you must have seen Silence, the film Silence, about exactly so these kind of things. Silence is in the 1630s, but this was already going on in the 1614, 1615, and Morrejón wrote about it. Now, the interesting thing is he wrote it in Spanish, but very quickly the book was translated into English and appeared in English in 1619 for English Catholics. So the idea was to compare the experiences of what was going on in Japan in terms of persecution with what was going on in England. And very quickly, much quicker than today sometimes, people printed and translated these writings. And interestingly, they were first meant as in this preface of this English book, you can actually read how the translator compares the situation in England with Japan and addresses English Catholics. But curiously, the collectors who sent these books and gave them to the Bodleian Library were not necessarily persecuted Catholics. We have books, for example, here, a book also about in Latin, but also about the persecution in Japan, which was given by John Selden. And Selden was a famous collector. Many of you know the Selden books. So he was generally interested in anything that was going on in the East. So he collected these books. There's another book printed by the Jesuit press in Japan. The Jesuit had a printing press, and I think it's printed in 1591. A book in Japanese, but not in Japanese script, as you see here, handwriting. This book is printed in our Roman alphabet, but in Japanese language. So it's very difficult for us to read. 3 more minutes, yeah. But this was also part of the Selden collection, just to show you that there are many other books. In my chapter, I went to Christchurch. There was an Archbishop Wake, who collected anything about what was going on in Japan, and lots of this writing about persecution. But again, many established Anglican people were also interested in this because they were in general interested in the situation of Christendom around the world. I think in that period, not everyone was always thinking in terms of being anti, but people were generally interested. And we have these books, and that's actually everything. I mean, I could go on talking could give a seminar series, but I stop before I'm being stopped.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm curious about this logbook and whether it is a Japanese item physically or Western. And I think we have a conservator here who may know it. Robert? Sorry to put you on the spot.
It's certainly Japanese paper, so it's written on Japanese paper.
Japanese paper.
Mike will know what language it's in English.
It's in English because Michael can read it and I can't. But I can read here and he can't. So, you know.
And it seems as though Will Adams is having a go using a Japanese pen, brush.
I don't know with what pen or brush or fountain pen, what kind of.
That's very unusual. That looks like he's used a brush that that someone might have used to
That's
produce those
interesting.
characters.
Yes, I never really looked at the English manuscript like this.
Anyway,
but it's
wonderful.
interesting. The question of what is Japanese and what not is very important. And I think with Sanctos, this kind of Jesuit prints, this becomes a very alarming question, because often these books ended up in all kinds of, they're hidden, and to this day my colleagues, they discover in Paris, in Venice, little books printed in Japanese, but in the Roman alphabet, printed in Japan, so actually Japanese books, but it was not considered, and many people would still not consider it as Japanese, because it's not written in Japanese characters. But, you know, it's a bigger debate of what is Western, what is, anyway.
Okay. Another round of applause.
Mike, would you mind turning a couple of pages just to look for different ink? So it would be interesting to see the.
This is actually quite interesting because here you've got the vocabulary, so it's Japanese phonetic script.
Yeah. But it really looks as if the next page is done with a brush rather than with a pen.
Oh, right. Doesn't appear to be particularly.
Yeah. It seems to be only really the first page where he experimented with
There are
it.
later on a few pen files,
Yeah.
but it wasn't there.
Yes, because it's probably also material.
It could just be that his pen wasn't very good.